Hi everyone, welcome to another Cycling South Australia Winter Criterium. Once again, I'm racing solo in C grade, and you can see the A grade's just about to set off in front of me. Uh, Now, I know a lot of people have some fairly strong opinions about racing in pro team kit. I personally think it's great, like why not support your team, your favourite riders. In this case, though, the bloke in the Jumbo-Visma kit just ahead of me is actually Chris Harper, who apparently hasn't been able to get back to Europe, so he's been racing here in Adelaide. It really shows the calibre of racing here, I think, because I don't think he actually finished in the front group. A few notes on tech. I'm still racing with a dodgy power meter, which reads about 10 to 15% below. And my GoPro's still got the lovely scratched lens at the front with a little bit of blur. However, after this race, I actually dropped around to the shops and bought a new GoPro and a bit of kit to go with it. So hopefully from next week, I'll have a bit clearer footage for you. So coming into this race, I'd planned to make an attempt in a breakaway. It's not something I usually do. It's not the type of strategy that suits me. But having not really had much of an impact at the end of the race in the last few races, I decided to try something a bit different. During the warm-up before the race, I decided that was a terrible idea and that I would just hide as much as I could, follow absolutely no attacks and hope for a bunch sprint without having spent any extra energy. So we'll see how that panned out. So right at the start, I'm sitting at about third wheel. I wanted to be near the front, but I didn't want to be on the front. And I didn't want to accidentally find myself on the front if a few too many people peeled off ahead of me. So coming around here in a little bit, I let a gap open up and drop back just a couple of wheels. As you'll see coming up, I probably dropped back a few more wheels than I really should have. You can see 309's about to pull off here. But I didn't want to be at the front of the race. I'm probably still sitting about the top third at the end of this. It's the same course as I've raced on the last couple of weeks. Just 4 right hands with a bit of a chicane at the bottom. Not really much of a hill. It's enough to sap you a little bit, but it's not really a hill. And the pace was pretty high. It was about half a kilometre an hour lower than my last 2 races, which both averaged 42 k's an hour. Going around the bottom of the main straight, we come into the chicanes going through here. The track was a little bit wet. It had been raining the night before, and it had been drizzling a tiny bit during the junior races in the morning, but the sun was well and truly out, and you'll actually see the road drying up throughout the race. So we're not long into the race, and the pace has really heated up already. You can see here I'm hitting about 500 watts just trying to stick on wheels. And as we get down to the main straight on the second lap, you can see that someone's really trying to line it up at the front. There was a point just coming up ahead where I felt like I was really struggling to stay on a wheel, even in the draft. And I was trying to decide whether or not to put in a bit of extra effort to get onto the guy's wheel, or whether or not just to keep tapping out a steady rhythm and hope that things settle down. Fortunately for me, they did settle down a bit, but the first couple of laps were a bit hotter than maybe I'd like. I've gone a bit wide at the corner here. The bunch was still really twitchy at this point. Throughout the race, they did settle down a bit. And by the end of the race, things were a bit steadier, and the corners felt a bit more predictable. But right at the start of the race, things were all over the place. So again, here I am sitting at about 500 watts, and a gap still opening up ahead of me, which does eventually close. So far so good. I've had a bit of a rest, and we're coming into really just the end of the second lap, and once again I'm spiking up to 450, 500 watts. Now at the end of this second lap, we're already getting some attacks trying to get up the road. This time I was determined not to get suckered into following those wheels. So on this occasion, even though there's a few people looking like they're wanting to make a bit of a move, I decided to sit in and not get suckered into chasing. I'm probably in a pretty good spot at this point. You can see up ahead the Butterfield's development squad riders. They're just to the left here. They're riding really well as a team at the moment. He does a turn, 320 does a turn, and I'm worried that I'm going to wind up on the front. As you can see, there's a bit of a gap ahead. I was a bit worried that I might end up having to chase that down myself, but number 320 just ahead of me does all the work. Now he goes through to the front. I'm not interested in pushing the pace at this point, and so I just slot in behind number 313 and sit behind the attackers. Now I mentioned the Butterfield's development squad. You can see 1, 2, 3 of them going up to the front here. You might remember from the last race that there were 3 Butterfield's riders right up the front. One of them pushed the pace really high. Another one took a turn, kept the pace really high. Then a third one of them attacked, and the other 2 fanned out across the road. Well, guess what happens just here? 1, 2, 3, done some turns on the front. 2 of them spread out, and 1 of them goes straight up the road. It's almost like they are practicing a team strategy. They did get up at the road. They did get a bit of a break. It was a bit of a nervous period for me, just trying to decide whether this was going to be a break that might go all the way. At this point, my legs aren't feeling great. I'm not really feeling like doing any efforts that I don't have to do. So I have a bit of a sit and just chill for a bit. So we've jumped forward a bit. We're now just at the top of the track on lap 7. And you can see just here a few riders attempting to go up the road a bit. Now A grade passed us near the end of lap 4, but the pace has actually been so high through this point that there's not a whole lot of separation between the groups. A few more people are attacking here on the main straight, and they bridge up to the 2 breakaway riders which are up the road. Now the main split happens here behind a rider who's actually a Paralympic world champion. Darren Hicks is the rider. He's missing his right leg. He's the current Paralympic world champion on the track, and he's actually got, I think he's the January 2019 Australian Paralympic road champion as well. So he's absolutely a phenomenal rider. But in any event, he gets stuck on the front, coming along up here. A brake goes away just ahead of him, and while he's got an absolutely enormous engine, he doesn't really have the snap necessary to close down a brake quickly, and as a result he ends up sitting on the front by himself pretty much for really quite a long time. At the top of lap 8 he's still sitting on the front by himself, doing the lion's share of the work. At this point I was reasonably sure that the brake was going to come back. I think I was yelling at people to go do a turn ahead of him, but I certainly wasn't prepared to do any work myself at this point. So you can see a reasonably big brake just up the road to the right. That's our grade, and Darren Hicks there at the front is still pretty much towing this thing along all by himself. I didn't actually realise at this point in the race, I knew he was a really strong rider, but I didn't realise he was the current world track champion and the reigning national champion. This brake stays up the road a little bit, so you can hear the brake. You can see the brake here going up. Sorry, I think this is where the split really started. That goes on for a little bit. Fast forward to about the top of lap 10, and the brake's in sight, and by the end of that lap they've been caught. My big concern at this point is that if there's only one person doing any work on the front and there's a reasonably big break up the road, that's the sort of thing that can go all the way. Now, we're 15 minutes into a 35-minute plus 2 crit, so about a 40-minute crit. It's probably too early for a break to stay away if the peloton is willing to do a bit of work. But on the other hand, with the break as big as that one is up the road, there's a risk that it can stay away. And in B grade and A grade, if that breaks up the road, that's gone every day of the week. At this point, I'm still absolutely dedicated to my pre-race plan of doing no work at all and just hanging on as long as possible. So we're a few laps later, the brake's been caught, and this is now the start of lap 11, and the group's fanning out, the race is slowing down. And what does NorCal Cycling always tell you to do when the brake's been caught and the race slows down? That's when you attack. So what do? I don't want to attack. I do not want to start a break. I'm absolutely dedicated to my plan not to attack. I'm not going to follow any moves. I am going to expect this to come down to a bunch sprint because it's C grade, and it always comes down to a bunch sprint. I do not need to be chasing any moves. I do not need to be getting into any breakaways. NorCal Cycling might be able to go for a 20-lap breakaway 16 times in a row. Oh, hang on. No, I'm going for an attack. So much for that pre-race plan. I'm going for a breakaway. So much for my plan to stay sheltered for the whole race. Now, I see one guy going up the road and I figure, look, you know, this is a C grade race. It's a C priority race. It's training more than anything else. Why not give it a go? So I put in a dig and I get on this guy's wheel. Now we actually have a pretty good composition here. We've got a guy from Butterfield's development squad. We've got a guy from, I think it's Coffeelosophy, or Psycholosophy. I'm a solo. We don't have anyone from Norwood, and so just the three of us are probably unlikely to stay away. Butterfields won't chase us, but Norwood certainly will, and as always, they've got a huge presence here. But anyway, I'm going to give this a good shot. So I'm sitting on the front. I'm really trying to hit somewhere between 330 and 350 watts. I don't want to go too deep, but by the same token, I want this to have a chance of staying away. And so I'm going to put in a bit of effort into it. Both the Butterfields guy and the Coffeelosophy rider, they're both pretty strong. And more importantly, they're both willing to do a bit of work. So I'm pretty happy with this at this point. I've done a bit of work showing that I'm willing to I want this to go to the end. Now, coming up the main straight, at some point along here, I realised that we've picked up another rider, which surprised me a bit. But then again, 4 going up the road is probably better than 3, particularly if everyone is working, and certainly everyone was working here. I'm sitting at 350. Taking into account the power meter offset, that's probably around 125%, give or take. So I'm definitely putting in, going pretty hard. There we go. This rider I've just slotted in behind's new. I didn't see him bridge across. And so here we go. We've got 4 riders in a breakaway. I'm hoping to make it, hoping to get it all the way through to the end. Now the nice thing about riding in a breakaway is it is a little bit smoother, except when you're actually on the front. So you can take your line through the corners a bit better, and that's always an advantage. Now coming through here, I take a turn on the front, and unfortunately the guy behind me, I think it might have been that guy in the silver who hopped straight back on my wheel, just coming through here, he actually clipped my wheel and went crashing into the barricade. I don't know if it was my fault. I don't think it was. I can't remember which way the wind was going here, but just at this point, he's actually crashed which has cut our breakaway down a bit. I'm looking backwards to try to see who's coming through. We still had a bit of a gap, so I decided to at least keep the pace high while we were getting reorganised. Obviously I'm down to 250 watts. I'm not really putting in a big dig at this point. I'm waiting for someone to come through. But what that did allow is for a couple of other riders to bridge across, and so now there's actually 4 or 5 of us. Ahead of me on the Green Giant is my buddy Alex. He's an incredible rider. I think he should probably be booted up a grade. I think he won this today. He's certainly been in the top 3 for all 3 of these winter criteriums, and I had to put in a fairly big dig just to try to get back on the wheel of that. But anyway, we've still got a bit of a gap. I think we had about 5 seconds at this point. I think we pushed it out to about 10 seconds, but ultimately it got pulled back in. So here we are, the main straight, lap 14. I've come through to the front to do another turn. Coming down this hill's often a bit tricky to put out a sustained power, because just as you go across the start-finish line, the gradient drops off and you start going downhill pretty quick and picking up speed. Coming through this corner, I'm putting in, same reasonable effort I've been putting through every time on the front. My heart rate's not too high. But at this point, Alex comes through on my left, tells me we've been caught, and tells me to drop the power and give up, which I do. So I probably could have been paying a bit more attention to where the peloton was. Here goes another Butterfields rider. What do you do after the brake's been caught? You attack. I thought for a moment Alex was going to be able to get on that wheel, but eventually he does slot in. Darren Hicks coming through. So there I've spent a bit more effort than I had originally planned to. The breakaway looked promising. I don't know who chased us back. I have a suspicion that Darren was just doing his thing on the front. But anyway, at this point I'm going back to plan A, which is just sit in and hopefully have something left for the last 2 laps. So let's have a look. So we're about 2 laps to go. I've decided it's time to start getting back to the front. I've had a few laps now sitting in, and although I did work pretty hard on the breakaway, I didn't really ever go above 400 watts. So although I spent some energy, I didn't really burn any matches. So I was a little bit more confident today of being able to sit in and actually be there near the end of the race. As you can see, the pace is still heating up. And then it slows down. Coming up the main straight, it slows down, and keep a little bit of power on, and make my way nearly to the front. And again, I don't want to be too close to the front. If I can get in behind this guy from ADX Depot, he's a good wheel to follow. He's quite a steady tempo rider. He can put out a lot of power for a long time. And my buddy 313, who I think I can see just up ahead, is always good. He almost always goes for a late race attack. And I think I saw Alex on the Green Giant coming through as well. So coming into the main straight, we have 2 laps to go, and breakaway, the group's all together. I think a couple of guys go, yeah, here we go. So someone goes for an attack here, and I was fairly tempted to follow, just because it's 2 laps to go, and that's the sort of thing that you can get stuck on if it does go away. And I did actually put a bit of a dig up on the front, and then went, no, that's way too early. I'm not going to be able to sustain that, so I dropped back. I probably lost a little bit more room going backwards than I intended. I actually blocked the ADX Depot guy in. I should have stayed on his wheel, because I know he'll close everything. But eventually I did get back in the line. That attack has pushed up the pace quite a bit, which is suiting me fine, because some of these guys are the big hitters, which will make it hard at the very end. My heart rate's pretty high at this point, so although I have had a little bit of time sitting in, the pace has gone significantly up. And and I'm not quite as recovered as I might have hoped to have been with now 1 lap to go. Alright, so we are 1 lap to go. It's all back together again. There's a few individuals sort of scattered across the road. Number 313, there he goes for his 1 lap. The ADX rider looked like going to close it himself, but then Butterfields did instead. And now we're closing in on the main straight for the last time. My heart rate's sitting pretty much close to the max that I ever see. The highest I've seen recently is about 194. And at this point, I'm reasonably happy, except then another line goes down on the right. Now, I think, from something someone else said, there was a cross headwind coming from the right here. So I should have come up on the left and tried to get up closer to the front. Because I'm now really too far back to have a good shot at winning this. I should be third wheel if I could trust that I had 1 or 2 riders ahead of me who would be consistent all the way to the end. Anyway, I decided I might as well go for it. So at this point I stand up and stand up and get out of the saddle. And I'm actually quite pleasantly surprised at this point that I felt like I had a lot more in my sprint than I had expected to have. I was pretty much on the limit, but I was, as you can see, I'm starting to come around people pretty quickly, and unfortunately I just wasn't quick enough to get past that guy on my left, and I ended up going a bit cross-country. My front wheel went into the dirt, went sideways, and although I did keep it up, I lost a whole lot of momentum, and then had to try to get back up to speed in the wrong gear, having gone cross-country. I think I came in at about 9th for that. So, my takeaways for this race, the breakaway wasn't necessarily the end of the race if it doesn't work. I think in the future I need to be a bit more committed to hurting in the last lap. I need to make sure that I'm a bit closer to the front, and where there is a cross headwind down the main straight, it's probably worth spending a little bit of effort to try to get back to the front or to stay at the front on the leeward side of the peloton. I got a bit more of a feeling in this race that there's a big difference between my sprint and my VO2, and that effectively, even though I was pretty cooked and wouldn't have had much more in me at 400 watts, I did have quite a bit of a sprint left in me at 800 watts. So I need to trust that that is going to be there and probably unleash that a little bit earlier. Another takeaway is that sometimes you can be going faster than everyone else and just have nowhere to go. Coming into that last corner where I went cross country, if I'd gone around him on the other way, I would have been way slower. I would have had to have slowed down. So sometimes you've got the effort, you've got the power, but you just don't have the position. I probably wasn't sitting very well in the draft going into that last chicane. I probably needed to be on the right-hand side of the peloton going into the hairpin and not the left. And I also need to pick a better wheel to follow. Someone who is actually going to be contesting the sprint and just sit on their wheel and not let it go. Anyway guys, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.